We can't just print them or silk screen them or whatever, because the thing that puts the sanctity into them, because you're obviously well aware of the kind of kavod, the kind of respect that we pay to Torah scrolls, for example, and the deference we have for these objects, not in any inappropriate way. It's not worshiping the objects, obviously, but they, as a vessel, hold the word of God. And what's important is that the person who writes them has the appropriate kavanah, the appropriate intention, and the right sort of holy consciousness. And that is what imbues these things with the sanctity. That's why you have to say each word before you write it. You have to say each letter before you write it. And you have to make a special declaration every time you're going to write God's name, because you're never supposed to write God's name.
What's the declaration?
Well, it's basically is I'm writing this name for the sake of the sanctity of the holiness of the name. And some people also say it as though, because it's, for the sanctity of this particular piece of stone, whatever it is. So if it's a Sefer Torah or a mezuzah or something like that. But you need to do that. And there's different traditions around that. Some say you have to make a special dip of your pen.
Really?
Yeah, and have that consciousness even when you're dipping. And then others say, if you dip, you still need to test your pen, because you don't want to dip and then write, because if you make a blob, then you've blotted God's name, and that's very...
And you can't erase the mistake, the blob mistake, right?
No, you can't. That's one of the many, many rules.
Okay.
You can only correct by adding ink. And you can't correct by carving away or shaping. That's another reason why we can't have things like screen printing and stuff like that. So although we have books that we use in the synagogue, obviously, that are a printed version that we can read, we can't have like a public reading. We need to have a scroll, and we need to have somebody who is minimally observant, Shabbat, kashrut, that sort of thing, to be writing those things for us.
So I want to dwell on this point for a minute. So, and this is a key. I feel like that maybe I wonder if the audience is missing. I wouldn't assume they know this. Let's put it that way. That there are these three ritual objects: a Torah scroll, phylacteries, and we can describe what that is, I suppose, and mezuzahs, which again can show us there actually, but let's hold on to that.
Okay.
There are these three ritual objects that have to fulfill certain specifications and be prepared in a certain way in order to be valid for ritual use. That's basically what it comes down to. Is that right?
Yes, and there's a long chain of that. It begins actually well before the scribe. It begins with when you're making the skin, the hide, into parchment. Actually, it starts with the animal. The animal has to be kosher. The feather that you write with has to come from a kosher bird that you would be allowed to eat.
So you can't use like an eagle's feather?
Never, ever.
Okay.
Then the whole thing is not kosher. The whole thing is
okay.
pasul. Yeah. And if you did something like that, and then you sold it to someone and they didn't know, all the blessings they would say on that would be in vain, and they would all land on you.
Okay.
So there's going to be a special place in the afterlife for people who do that.
So just so the audience understands, so there is this, and it's not just a tradition, meaning it's a halakhically binding, if you consider it binding, like ritual that you hear the Torah read every week in the synagogue, and if the Torah is read from a scroll that wasn't prepared according to all these specifications, then you haven't fulfilled the duty. Is that essentially what it is?
It's essentially true. Now, we're very lucky that God is merciful. So if it's just through a mistake, then, humans do make mistakes. And that's one of the reasons why when you write something like a Torah scroll, not only do you have to be so careful about copying it exactly from another Torah scroll, or for a book that we call a Tikkun L'Sofrim. I have a little bit of one. I have just Bereshit here, just Genesis. It's just a small, and it has all of the top and the bottom of the columns, and it has little codes on it, so it tells you how much you have to stretch or cramp your letters, and it also tells you if one of God's names is coming up. You see, it says Kodesh over here, because there are some words that can refer to idols or things that are not God. So you have to be careful not to sanctify those, because
that's really interesting. So I saw a Torah scroll when I was doing my research. Where there's a phrase where it says Elohei Adoni Avraham. It It's in Genesis 24.
Right.
The God of my Lord Abraham. And the word Adoni was cut out, leaving a blank space, and then rewritten in very small letters above the line. And it's very clear to me, at least, that what the scribe did is he wrote Elohe, and then he wrote, instead of Adoni, he wrote the exact same 4 letters, but with the thought that it was one of God's titles. And so when he realized that, he's like, oh no, I wrote a sacred name here, even though, I mean, Adoni is my Lord, referring to Abraham.
Right,
but
yeah.
he wrote the Lord, referring
Right.
to God.
Yes.
And so he had to cut it out because now he has a holy name where it doesn't belong, even though it's graphically identical to
Right.
the word that means my Lord.
Yes.
Right? Meaning from the perspective of anybody besides that scribe who would have looked at that could never even theoretically know that it was done wrong.
No.
But he knew.
Right. And that is exactly why you have to be able to trust your scribe, like you trust your lawyer, your doctor, your jeweler, etc. You need to be able to trust them 100%. Not that they'll never make a mistake, but that if they do make a mistake, they will make it right and they'll be honest about it.
Okay,
You know,
so-
I've made mistakes. It's awful, but it happens. And just to add to your story, some opinions would say that he shouldn't have just cut that name out. He would have pasuled the entire Uriah, the entire sheet of parchment, and he would have had to start that sheet again, just rewrite that entire sheet, and he would have had to bury that.
This is in the Middle Ages. They quite routinely cut out,
Yeah.
you know, the name of God,
And you
when there was a
can still
mistake.
do that. I mean, you're really supposed to cut out other things on either side and not just the name of God. But again, there's different opinions.
Yeah.
So, and practice has changed, like I said, not just by location, but over time to some extent.
Yeah, I found one passage where it talked about if you left out a word, that what it talks about in the medieval literature is you write it above the line.
Yep.
And this rabbi in the 19th century or something, he says, don't write it, you know, today nobody will know what that is and they'll be confused, so don't do it.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to it.
Right.
So back in the day, meaning even 400 or 500 years ago, they would routinely write entire verses above the line.
And I've seen that.
And now they don't do it, or if they do, it's extremely rare, I suppose.
Yeah, it's very practical, though, to be able to do that, and it's not ideal. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, when you come across that, it's like, oh, okay, well, at least you caught the mistake.
Yeah.
You know.
It's probably more common, I would think, like in an Esther scroll. So let's go back to this. So we have Torah scroll,
Right.
Tefillin, which is phylacteries, and mezuzah. An Esther scroll, does that have to be written with the proper intent? Meaning there's certain intent that goes into writing those first 3 things, right? And that's why you need to trust the person. Like whenever you write God's name, you have to be thinking, this is a holy name, right? And you were saying some people even say the words, I'm writing this for the sake of...
And say each letter as well.
Tell me that.
Well, I mean, because that's one of the ways you avoid making a mistake, is if you look at your layout guide, if you look at your tikkun and you go, okay, and you've got that isolated so that you're not accidentally writing something from a different
open that up
line.
and show me a place where it has God's name.
Okay.
And tell me what you would do when you got to that.
Okay, so right here, for example, it says
Okay.
Kodesh
Holy.
here, right? So you go along and you go, oh, look, here we go.
Okay.
And there's a circle above it, you know, and there's actually another one down here.
Okay.
See?
Let's
Circle
let's
above
find
it.
my favorite one, the Tetragrammaton. So, I don't know, open up to, I know it's all over the place here. So, let's see. No, that's Elohim.
There's also instances where it says whole, because it might be referring to idols or something like that. So
Right.
it makes sure that you don't sanctify it.
Right.
So it also takes your attention to, you know,
Like,
at
for
that.
example, in Ten Commandments, where it says, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, you shall not
Right.
have other
Exactly.
Elohim.
Exactly.
So Elohim there
Like in
doesn't
the
refer to
mezuzah.
God.
No,
Okay.
don't go out. Don't go after other gods. That's
Okay.
right. So you can't sanctify that word because you're talking about the other gods.
So you have to make sure not to sanctify that word.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Otherwise, you start again, and that's your punishment.
Well, we'll talk about the mezuzah because that's fascinating in and of itself. That's like a special case, right? Of course, when I want to find it, I'm not finding it.
This is exactly the same for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know there's one here in Genesis 15.
I'll tell you another story while you're
Yeah.
looking for it.
Tell me.
So I was writing part of. Oh, yeah, that's not what you're looking for.
Which
This is
one?
not the God's name you're looking for.
Right. Okay, so I'm looking for where it says Kodesh here. Okay.
You're looking for, where it says Kodesh.
Okay.
And then go across and you can, so here we've got
Right.
Kel.
So I've seen other ones where it's like underlined,
Yeah.
and then it'll write
Right.
above it Kodesh.
Yeah, sometimes they
Holy.
do that as well. It's different depending on the layout guide. There's
Okay.
different ways of doing it, as long as they get your attention.
Here is okay. So that is Aleph Dal Nun Yud. All right.
And that's Kodesh.
Um,
There are
yeah.
instances where the little word on the side, instead of Kodesh or Chol, it actually says Safek, which means, here we
so
go.
tell us about
There's
that.
Chol, see?
Okay.
So here we go. This is Chol. So you do not sanctify that. It's already warned you.
So
Don't
here
do
it says,
Don't do it.
okay, it says, Rak la'anashim ha'el, only to these people. And ha'el means these, but it could also, if you didn't have a context, it could be God.
And if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, or if you
Right.
don't understand what it says,
Right.
it needs to be all those things, right?
Wow. So you have to mentally form an intent in your mind that, okay, when I write this word, here's an example of Adoni, my Lord, right? Not referring to God. And it says Chol,
It says Chol.
which means non-holy,
Right.
or non-sacred. So that, we'll talk about this in a second. So that's interesting. I was trying to explain this to someone, and I actually wrote an academic journal article, and I referred to non-sacred words.
Yeah.
And one of the peer reviewers said, what do you mean? Isn't every word in the Torah sacred? Yeah, but not in this context, meaning a sacred word is one of the 7 or 10 names of God or titles of God, and everything else is non-sacred. Even a title of God like Rachum, merciful one. So that is considered non-sacred, meaning you're allowed to erase it. That was what I meant.
There are 7 that you have these extra special rules applied to them. But yes, in theory, in Judaism, God has like 100 names.
Right.
You know, Harachaman, the merciful one.
Right. But those you're allowed to erase by traditional law.
Yep.
By halakha, which means they're considered chol, they're considered non-sacred. All right, so here we're in Genesis 19, verse 5, and it's talking about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it says, Yud, He, Vav, He.
Right, and it says Kodesh.
And it says holy.
And there's a little
so how would you do this? You come to this, you're a scribe, you're working, you're writing a Torah scroll.
I get to that line, and I generally will have, something over like that, and I just move this down so that
That is so cool. You know why that's cool? Wait, I don't know if people saw that. So she has something that makes sure she only copies from the line she's on and not another line.
It is so easy to copy from the wrong line because you often have repetition as well.
So there are so many manuscripts, Torah scrolls even, where we have these scribal errors where it's clear that the scribe's eye jumped as he was looking back and forth at his source, and his eye jumped from one line to the next line, and he missed an entire line.
Yep.
And then he has to come back, and he has to scratch out 5 lines and rewrite them as 4, or 4 rewrite them as 5, right? Different scenarios.
That is where your burnisher comes in handy.
Okay.
So you can re-prepare the surface of the parchment.
So
you don't get sort of furry letters. You want to have nice, sharp letters.
Well, sometimes they get furry letters. And sometimes the entire page after 800 years, the entire sheet is all the ink is flaked off, except for those 5 lines that he rewrote. There the ink stuck better. And then sometimes it's the opposite. Everything is intact except for those lines. All right. So you come to here and you mark off so you don't go to the wrong line, and you write kimashchit normally.
Yeah. Now what do you do? The other thing you do is, what I do is I always have paper, just printer paper, just normal paper, craft paper, whatever, down on top of the naked parchment, like the blank stuff that I haven't written on yet. And then I will have this, like where I'm writing, I'll have this like very close at hand so that I have it right in front of me. And then, like I said, I'll cover everything up.
So this is what you're copying from.
Right. So I basically isolate everything that I'm doing to avoid mistakes, partly because, again, some of them have tremendous significance and consequences, and other times you just don't want to waste your time. Like, let's face it, it's backbreaking work, literally. So then I would come to this, and then I'd go, okay, so ki, so chaf, yud. And
Do you say the word ki?
Yeah.
You say it out loud?
Yeah.
Okay, so you say the word because.
This is what I was taught.
So you actually say each word as you're writing.
So that,
that's
and
how you
then
were
when
taught.
you come to the end of mashchit, then
Presumably you don't say God's name.
you don't. Well, we don't know how to say God's name, really, do we? I know there's a debate about
that's
that.
That's a separate conversation.
It is a separate
let's
conversation. But what I would say is I would make a verbal declaration that I am about to write this holy name for the sake of the mitzvah of Sefer Torah and for the sake of the holiness of the name. And that does not give you permission to write it, because really you still should only ever write any of these of God's names in stam, in like ritual items. You're not supposed to just be writing it all over the place. I saw online someone was like printing them on cushions, and I was just like, please don't do that. You know, you don't want people sitting on God's name on cushions. Anyway,
Okay.
well, you know, and then you would say Yud, Hey, Vav.
So you would pronounce out each of the 4 letters.
I would say each of the 4 letters, and I would still look each time. I know how to write this name.
Right.
Right? It's stamped, like Simeni Kachotim Alebecha, right? Like it's stamped on my heart, this name, but I still look and say it and write and look and say it and write, because that's what you do. That's how you don't make a mistake. Sometimes you still make a mistake, hopefully not with any of God's names.